Hello and welcome back to another edition of Journalism 101 from Global News Alliance. I am still Sam Ebersole, Director of Training for GNA, and in this series, this is a two-part today. We're interviewing working journalists who are sharing their experience and expertise, and we're just excited today to have part two with Joe and Kathy Sindorf, husband and wife team, who have been telling stories together for a long time. And I won't say how long, but it's just been a while. And if you want to know more about what they bring to this profession, I would encourage you to go back and watch part one, where I go into a little bit more detail of the many, many awards that they've won and the 85 countries that they've traveled to and the networks that they've worked for. And they're both educators and trainers, as well as producers, writers, editors, shooters. They do it all. So as a husband and wife team, we're just excited to have them back to talk a little bit more about things that they started to talk about in the first part. Joe and Kathy, visual storytelling, which seems to be at the core of your storytelling technique. What is it, and how do you develop that skill set, and what are some tricks that you can share with our journalists?
Hi, Sam. Good question. And we love visual storytelling. As you said, we have taught it around the world. And we firmly believe that it's not just the role of journalists to use visual storytelling, but really within an organization, everyone should be trained. Everyone should realize that it's part of their responsibility because you don't have time anymore eh, to get a professional team out on the field to cover a story as it happens. But we try to encourage missionaries and humanitarians who are working in different areas to use their phones, use whatever equipment they have, and just be alert, keep their antenna out for stories. So, the reason that they're visual, of course, is that a picture communicates more than just sound. But if you only have sound, then use that. But I think God is working today. God is moving around the world. And if we can all, as Christians, just be alert to the fact that there are stories happening all around us, the reason for capturing them and telling them is that they encourage other people and they encourage people to see that wherever they are, that God can also be working there too. They just have to be watching for it. So it's really not as complicated as people think because most visual storytelling starts with an interview. It starts with somebody on camera telling a story. Then, if you need to add some B roll, if you need to add some reporting to get in and out of it and edit it together, fine. But if you only have an interview of somebody telling what God's done in their life or what they've seen or what kind of miracles have happened in their area recently, that is powerful and that's going to communicate, and we need to be telling these stories and sharing these stories and not waiting until they're perfect because I think perfection is the enemy of excellence. We just need to capture them. We need to distribute them. And that's something that Hollywood has learned. That's something that YouTube has learned. It's like we need to be getting God, our stories, we need to be getting God's stories out there for people to watch.
And visual storytelling, Sam, is a skill like anything else. How do you become a good piano player? By spending a whole lot of time playing the piano. How do you become good at prayer? By praying, spending time with the Lord. How do you become a good visual storyteller? You spend time taking pictures, shooting video, giving yourself assignments. Don't wait for somebody to hire you or ask you to do something before you start putting together the skills that you need to do visual storytelling. Do whatever it is to capture that look and feel, and then bring it back, edit it, and then watch it, show it to somebody else, discuss it, see what it is that you could perhaps do to improve it, and then keep doing that. Really, it doesn't matter what you have for gear, for equipment. Some people ask, what's the best camera? What camera should I get? And really, the best camera is the one that you have with you. You can own the very best camera, and if it's sitting in a closet at your home, and you're out somewhere where the story's happening, it's not going to do you any good. But we all have our phones with us, all the time. And learning how to use the apps that are in your phone and using them consistently, finding out what happens if you do different settings, looking at it on a bigger screen, and then just doing it repeatedly. Get used to doing it so that you don't have to think about how to increase the audio level if you're in the middle of something, because it comes naturally to you because you've done it so many times. How to lock the focus so that your your lens isn't constantly looking for focus in there. There's all these little things that the more you do it, the more it becomes muscle memory, and the better you are. Most of us don't have to think about the steps to take to drink a cup of coffee or to eat a bowl of soup. We've done that enough, and visual storytelling has to be the same way. You have to know your gear. One of my friends, when we were going through this, he said, I wonder if they had this much problem when they first invented papyrus. How did getting to know this new technology? There's all these things we need to learn. The more time you spend with it, the better you're going to get at it. And it's just taking time. Really, what you need is something to record audio and video. I recommend your phone. And if you're going to spend a little bit of money after that, I would go for something to record better audio, a microphone. And there's some cheap ways you can get into that. And the third thing that I would buy is a tripod of some variety, some way to keep the image stable. And a lot of people buy tripods and they never use them. So if you're talking about visual storytelling with friends, you might just say, do you know if anybody who has a tripod they're not using? I could really use it. You might get one that way. It doesn't hurt to ask. So really, it's just getting out there and practicing, knowing the gear, making mistakes, doing it so often that it becomes second nature. And then when it's time to put it all on the line for a real assignment, then you know what you're doing, you look like a pro, and you'll get it done.
And Sam, a lot of those recommendations apply to the same way to practicing reporting on camera, which is a vital part of most journalistic videos. And I usually recommend to my students at the university to practice as they're walking around campus, practice as you're walking around your neighborhood, and use your camera, use your phone, or even just be talking to yourself. People don't think you're that weird these days if you are, but just reporting on what you're seeing. You can walk around your neighborhood and say, I see today that snow is covering most of the lawns, and many of the trees have already lost their leaves. Of course, the evergreens are still looking green and full. But it's interesting this time of the year because sometimes you can see more birds and squirrels, and you can see things. You're just talking about what you're seeing. You're talking about your day, but you're getting comfortable just hearing yourself talk and hearing yourself report on what you're observing. And also, if you can do that into your phone, it strengthens your ability to report too. And the other thing I would recommend, content is so important. So while you want to be able to think visually, you have to have strong content. And you can practice that in your neighborhood. You can practice that in your church when you talk to somebody, ask them about their story. Maybe you haven't even heard stories going on, but you can interview somebody and say, what's God doing in your life? What's he showing you recently? What are you learning from him? What's happening in your family? And stories will come out. Suddenly you'll be hearing things that you can develop into reports and stories and testimonies just by being curious, just by daring to put a microphone in front of somebody and ask them some good questions.
And I think one of the things, building on that, Cap, is to know what it is that you want the story to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
What is the end goal? What do you want people to do after they've watched or listened to your story that you're doing? And you can take stories in a whole lot of different directions. And I think that's one of the first things that Kathy and I did when we started working together many years ago. We'd sit down and talk about a story before we shot anything, before we got to the location. And it's like, okay, with this story, what is it that is the big point? What is it that we want to make sure comes out strong? What do we want people to do or to feel at the end of it? And so how do we structure this story? How do we ensure that we get the content that we need and the images that we need in order to deliver that end result that it is that we want people to do when they've watched or listened to this? Doing that saves you a whole lot of time. You're able to go into editing when you come back from shooting and actually get to work and not be frustrated, because chances are you'll have the things that you need to tell the story that it is that you want to tell.
And then the challenge is, once you know what story you want to tell, is how do I grab people's attention in the first few seconds? Because whether it's at an event or whether it's online, whether it's on YouTube, wherever, people are so used to scrolling through and clicking through to something else that if you don't capture somebody in the first like 3 to 8 seconds, they're not going to watch your story.
I know I have some favorite storytellers that I gain inspiration from. Are there some that you, in particular, find great inspiration in watching their work or listening to or reading their work?
Well, we're watching the news coverage every day. We're
Mm.
also we've started listening to audiobooks and
Mm.
how they're structured and how stories are told, it just with audio without even any visual content, which is really interesting. And so whenever we're driving somewhere, we're listening to an audiobook. In terms of actually presenters, I don't know that we have our. Do you have some favorites, Joe, that you want to mention? It's
I
hard.
don't, because there are a whole lot of people who have moments of real brilliance, and there are none that come to mind where it's like consistently I walked away, just floored with how good this was. So
Well, you
I
guys have high
really,
standards.
Oh yeah, we're
we
constantly
do, yeah,
discussing and
but
critiquing what we watch and listen to.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, that's true. But at the same time, we filled the net very broadly and watch stuff and listen to stuff that um, we're not sure what we're going to get when we go there. Um, but we just want to see another approach. We want to
Just
see how somebody else handles a topic, or um, is there something that we can glean? I pick up a lot of graphics ideas from watching people, because although I enjoy graphics and graphic design, I'm not trained in that area, except self-trained. And so by watching what's out there and seeing what's effective and then figuring out how to do it, um, that's that really is worthwhile for me. And when we do find something that's strong that we like on air or online, we'll typically find a way of downloading it so that we can watch it several times and just rip the thing apart and deconstruct it and figure out what it is that they did.
In terms of storytelling, I enjoy what they do on National Public Radio, which is accessible to people anywhere online, because they often will get a little bit more in depth with a story. They'll incorporate audio from the field, and they really draw me in to feel like I'm there, whether it's in a marketplace or in a country I've never even been to, but I can feel sort of the emotions of the people, and I get very interested in the story by the way that they're telling it.
What do they call
Yeah, and
those driveway stories, or where you
And
pull
right,
into the
where
right.
you
driveway, you have to keep listening? Yeah,
And that is absolutely the truth. There's been so many days I'm like, "Where's Kathy?" And I'll look out the front window, and she's sitting in the
she's
car
still in the
listening to
car.
NPR. Yeah,
Oh,
and and
when
and
we
she's
when we
right. I
lived in
mean, they do it.
Chicago, when we lived in Chicago, I would miss my exit sometimes coming home. And it's like, oh, then I have to call Joe. I'm going to be late. Missed it again.
But Kathy's absolutely right about visual storytellers listening to radio stories,
The-
because particularly the ones who do it well, they know that they need to add certain sounds to put you into that environment, to put the listener into that environment. And when we're working with visuals, often we get really lazy
We were
because we can just throw up a piece of video over top of whatever, and
audio is
think,
so
well,
important.
we've set the context, but really
We're
it needs to breathe. It mean you need to give your viewer or your listener a chance to really put their mind into that location. And that's something that we really enjoy doing, is not putting words in every moment of a story. There are
we're
some times when it just has to breathe a bit so that the viewer can also breathe and realize where you are, what time of day it is, how is this place different than where I am, and it just sets context. And so she's absolutely right. I really love stuff like the late great Anthony Bourdain, um, an amazing storyteller, um, and his crew was incredibly good at putting him into the place where he was, putting him into that context, and setting the scene. And I've been reading some of his stuff, some of his books lately, and he was not the most gentle person to work with. And so his crew needed to know how to do this without asking him to do something again. And because he just really hated doing something again, and so there are just so many things like that we try to learn from. We try to learn from commercials. We learn from whatever we're part of. And it's kind of cool that Kathy is teaching at the university level, because that keeps you sharp. Um,
Mhm.
Mhm.
she's 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 getting a new batch of people sitting in front of her every 6 months, um, often more frequently, and these are people that understand the current culture. She
Mhm.
has students from multiple international backgrounds, and it just keeps, she comes home, shares with me what she's heard, what she's learned. We take a look at things and investigate them, and it helps add to our lexicon, our
We're
dictionary
real.
of image making and storytelling.
At the same time,
Hey,
Joe's working with missionaries from our church around the country and around the world and trying to encourage them to use the technology they have to be able to continually send us stories. But one little thing I was thinking about with the audio and the importance of it is what Joe mentioned when we're editing something together, giving breathing space, opening it up so that there is opportunity for just the nat sound to come up full for a few seconds, for just a little transition here and there, some music. And one of the things that comes to mind is this summer when we were in Kenya, when we were finished shooting with the Maasai in their communities, we spent a little bit of time in Nairobi and especially in Kibera, which is one of the largest slums in the world. And we'd been there before. This time we were showing what ministry is doing there, helping the widows to who have basically once their husbands die, they've lost everything. They don't get any support from the families. They still have to raise their kids, and this ministry is helping them. And the widows were coming together and learning sewing and praying together. And then they all stood up and began to sing. And here we are, Sam, in this huge slum with these widows who have nothing, who are, who should be so sad. And the song that they were singing is Asante, which in Swahili is thank you. Thank you, Lord. And again, Asante, Asante. And it hit us there. It hit us even more when we got home and watched the video. And so we opened up just a what was it, Joe? Maybe 30 seconds at the end of this report, just to hear the women and to see them singing passionately from their hearts. And I think that emotional component comes through in your reporting through music, through sound. And that's something that's really important to incorporate.
Awesome. Hey, in the time we have remaining, can you kind of outline for us the scripting process? Because I know that a story, even if it's for video, usually starts with words on a page at some point, whether that's an outline or a shot list or what have you. And then it turns into a script, transcription, maybe from some interview sound bites, and then an editing script. Can you kind of walk us through that process?
I'm a firm
Yeah.
believer in the 2-column script, which has video on one side and then your content or the audio on the other side. And I think like that before I ever go on a shoot. And a lot of times I'll kind of rough it out. Like sometimes we don't know all the details when we go out on a shoot, especially with an organization. We don't know what we're getting into, but at least we kind of get a feel for how we would tell the story. Of course, it's going to morph, it's going to change, but at least it has some bones. It has some structure to build on. And then we really try to be sure that we're capturing good content everywhere we go. We're getting interviews. We're not just shooting B-roll. And then those interviews we listen to and try to decipher, okay, what part fits where? How does this all come together? And I always try to take good notes of people's names. And I also get those on the video, their title, so that those are things that you think you're going to remember when you get back home, but you need to have a good solid record of them. So if you have a record on video as well as in your written notes, you can put that together when you get back and make a more solid 2-column script to actually edit from.
And for us, things really have changed as technology has changed. Now it is so easy just to build a huge story, a long story in a timeline, and then watch it and get the sense of what works and what doesn't work. And then after those steps that Kathy's already talked about, after that happens, and we put this into a timeline, knowing that it's not the final script, but there's all these things in here that we think are going to work, then we can, just easily just start slicing things out, moving them somewhere else, moving entire chunks of the story around. Mm-hmm. And typically at that point, we look at it and see if it's doing what it is that we want the story to do. That it's building to something, and that there is a real conclusion, that there is something compelling that makes a person want to do the thing that we hope that they do. And so we're trying to build that graph, build to something. We want to make sure that it flows. We want to make sure that it makes sense, that the pieces that we have in there, that we have video that work with what we're hearing, because video is a visual medium, and you need something to support what you hear. And so we do that, and that helps us get it down to the length that we want it to be. And then we start really working for, refining voiceovers, refining transitions, and do the final edit that way. So there's really a mix between actual writing, coming up with the concept together.
And one of the things that's often neglected these days, Sam, is the ability to use voiceovers to transition and to actually tell the story. So I find that a lot of my young students at the university want to just do things sort of documentary style, like have one interview soundbite lead into the next. And it's hard. Sometimes they just don't flow well. And so a voiceover can transition, it can tell a story more succinctly. And then we try to use like short sound bites that go with the voiceover, but so you're not having to have a long, lengthy interview portion in order to explain something. I try to have voiceovers tell the facts and then use sound bites to give the feelings that people have. So
That's good.
fact, feeling back and forth. And occasionally, especially if you're reporting something that's newsy, throw in a stand up. And that's where your practice of reporting out in the neighborhood or on campus really comes in handy. But there's something about that reporter presence that actually adds credibility and helps your audience to kind of follow along. You've got somebody in the field. So if you can record some of those stand-ups while you're there in the field and reporting on a story, it adds a lot, and it adds authority, and it helps your viewers to be able to pay attention and to understand what's important that they should be listening for.
Well, thank you, you two, for sharing your time, sharing your stories, sharing your expertise. Um, just sharing your talent to advance the kingdom of God. And you've been doing it for 40 some years together, maybe close to 50. I don't know how many years you had together before you got married, but thank you all for sharing with our students and contributing to our efforts here at GNA, who, again, we're just trying to tell stories about what God is doing around the world and trying to equip people, giving them the tools to do that. So those of you watching, thank you. We encourage you to check out the gna.news website to learn more about what we're up to. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube to get more insight for being a working journalist, working around the world. And we want to be a resource for you in the future as you endeavor to tell stories about what God's doing in your church, in your community, in your country. We want you to have the tools to be able to do that. So thank you for being here. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.